Welcome to KBS World Radio. You're now tuned into Korea24's Korea Book Club, where we explore the world of Korean literature. This is our weekend replay edition, playing back our book segment from Wednesday's show. I hope you enjoy it. I'm your host, Alana Hill. And today we're joined by our literary critic, Barry Welsh. Thanks for joining us, Barry.
Hello, great to be here.
So, Barry, what are we delving into today?
So today's book is the high epic fantasy novel Blood for the Undying Throne by Song-il Kim, and it's part 2 of the Bleeding Empire trilogy and the follow-up to Blood of the Old Kings. The setting is a vast, oppressive fantasy empire which is powered by a very dark necromantic magic system which literally uses dead sorcerers' corpses as power sources. So very inventive and very dark at the same time. But the story features a lot of the usual fantasy elements. We've got dragons, sorcery, powered automatons and war machines. You have rebellions and uprisings, ancient secrets, and all of this kind of thing. And as seems to be very common in fantasy now following Game of Thrones, but you have multiple POV characters sort of tackling threats across the sort of whole scope of this empire. And the tone very much leans towards classic epic fantasy, so big world building, moral questions about power, and these sort of revolutionary underdogs sort of trying to rise up. But it's also maybe a little bit modern and perhaps specifically quite Korean if you look underneath the surface, and it has these kind of twists on empire and evil. The premise in this sequel is still extremely strange. This evil empire, which sort of literally runs on the corpses of dead wizards, has this group of ordinary people who are trying to, tear the empire down. This book sort of widens the canvas a little bit. So we have one character who's at the very heart of this empire in the capital city, where there's this assassination plot kind of unfolding. There's another character who leaves home to discover the truth about a mysterious kind of super weapon that turned one of the regions into a wasteland. And then finally, there's another character who is from this region, but this section is set 170 years in the past, sort of telling you the backstory. And so that element, that part of the story shows you this world before it was conquered and after it was devastated by this mysterious super weapon. But all of these threads revolve around this evil globalist empire. So you get lots of intrigue, kind of ancient dark secrets, and this sort of front row seat to a rebellion against evil.
Now, before we dive more into this book itself, I'm wondering, how does the tone and the scope compare to the first book in the series?
So Kim, the writer, he says the first book was the most straightforward, and it was more fast-paced and action-oriented. This second installment still has some of those, action set pieces, but it sort of digs a little bit deeper. It's more reflective. So we see the Empire's politics shift in the aftermath of the first book. I'll try not to spoil the first book. So it's difficult as well not to read the book as a commentary or critique on real-world power structures. So does any of this sound familiar? The Empire isn't just conquering lands in this fantasy world. It's devouring entire nations, folding them into one massive, faceless, bureaucratic blob where borders vanish, and all of these different, countries, their traditions, their unique folklore, and their core beliefs get sort of bulldozed into oblivion by these kind of evil sorcerers. So you don't have any more distinct cultures or histories. This empire is trying to standardize everything into a sort of fantasy one-world government. And the people in these regions, they're stripped of their humanity. They're turned into replaceable cogs in the machine, and they're just valued for what they can fuel or produce for this empire. And so the empire is saying to these people, you're not individuals with roots and stories, you're just widgets to be swapped out when convenient. So this kind of isn't fantasy. It's really a mirror about real world elite power, elite operation. And you have this very small, organized, sort of ruling class of necromantic sorcerers, and they craft these, ideologies which they're using to control and keep the masses passive. So in our world, you could think of these people, they're sort of techno globalists, right? They have a monopoly on this kind of necromantic magic, and they're using this to dominate these other groups. So they're commodifying all these other people, turning their cultures into economic units to be managed or migrated or discarded. And of course, this empire makes the people in these different regions feel like parts in a system that's against them. And it's very dehumanizing. They're just sort of treated as a fodder to be killed in wars and so on. And so this is an evil fantasy empire that's a bureaucratic managerial evil empire, which is quite strange, really.
It feels like there's definitely some deeper commentary there. Did anything in the real world, and perhaps in particular, from Korean culture or society, inspire that creepy concept?
Again, there's another very interesting element of these books. So they have this idea of the power generator, and it's very difficult not to read this as a metaphor for or a critique of the education system in South Korea. So famously, very competitive and often considered, soul-crushing education system. And how it works in this fantasy world, you have these young sorcerers, and they're groomed from very young childhood in these imperial academies, right? They're taken away from their families and spend hours in these academies. They're sort of stripped of their personal agency. They're trained, but they're not trained for their own fulfillment or enrichment or creativity, but they're trained to literally become fuel for this empire. And their corpses are turned into these sort of undead batteries that power the empire's war machines and its infrastructure and its dominance over these other regions. So they're only valued for their potential output. And again, they're just sort of reduced to exploitable resources in this very faceless bureaucratic system. And it really does seem like that Kim is writing about the real world education grind where young kids face this very relentless pressure, which starts in kindergarten and then goes through Hagwon and so on, right? And this competition to get into the top universities and so on. And it really does seem like this is something that Kim is talking about. This evil empire system, it commodifies the young students' magical talent into perpetual servitude.
Finally, Barry, what kind of reader do you think this book would appeal to?
Really, I think this is a book for fantasy fans. If you're not already a fan of the fantasy genre or high fantasy or epic fantasy, this probably isn't going to be something that you're too interested in. But if you are a fan of that genre, then this is definitely worth checking out.
Great stuff. Well, that's Blood for the Undying Throne, the second book in Sung-il Kim's Bleeding Empire trilogy. And if you like epic fantasy with big stakes, deep world building and some darker ideas under the surface, it sounds like one to put on your list. Barry Welsh, thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.